I disagree with the idea that everyone wants to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas wants to maximize civilian casualties because its calculations rely on the fact that Israel, the lever to to create pressure on Israel is to maximize the deaths of their own population about which they care very little. Mind you, that they have had all this money to build tunnels and they've not built a single bomb shelter for their populations because they want as many dead women and children that they can later use for their propaganda ruthlessly. Now, Israel doesn't aim at civilians ever. Israel abides by the international, deliberately, I mean, Israel abides by international law. And by the way, international law puts the blame squarely on Hamas. According to international law, if you immerse your combatants inside a civil population, the other side does not lose its right to self-defense. It should strive to minimize casualties, but those who still are your responsibility. This is if you go to the Pentagon and read the manual of rules of war according to international law that the United States has adopted, it's very, very clear about these things. Now, that doesn't mean that the world will not act in a hypocritical way and blame us for everything, despite the fact that we are making an effort to minimize those casualties. We are protecting our women and children from rockets, as our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, while they are protecting their rockets with women and children. This is what they're doing. And there are several considerations here. One is if you look at the letter that mothers of IDF soldiers have sent to President Biden, they said, we should not risk the lives of our soldiers any more than necessary in order to protect the human shields that they are putting in harm's way. This is not our business. And we who have sent our sons and daughters to this war don't want them to take one iota of extra risk in order to protect the civilian population that's being used on the other side. And this is a big controversy in Israel because, we didn't conduct carpet bombing from the air. And we put our soldiers at greater risk because we sent in infantry without flattening buildings, because we wanted to spare civilians. What other states usually do, and here America, United States, in the war against ISIS is a clear example. You don't risk the lives of your infantrymen. You first flatten everything from the air, as other peoples would do. We do not do that, and part of the calculation is, I'm sorry to say, a realistic calculation, saying we need to maximize the diplomatic period in which the pressure does not force us to end the war. So we don't want to increase civilian casualties. We want to minimize civilian casualties because we know what they're, not just because we're more moral, but also because we know how this is used against us. But it's completely unthinkable, as some idiots in Israel still say, who are super moralistic. They say the lives of their civilians are just as important as the lives of our soldiers, and there's no difference here. Well, there is a great difference. We can't create a situation, because this guy, who, by the way, wrote the moral code for the army, has an article saying that these are equal. And so if this is true, then according to his view, then if their combatants are hiding in civil population, then we can't attack them. So imagine what this means. It means that someone can come into Israel, slaughter hundreds of women and children, burn people alive, put a baby in the oven, open a mother's belly and take out her fetus. And then if they hide in civil population, say, oh, shucks, we can't do anything now. That's completely unthinkable. And so there's another school, and I don't completely endorse that either, but I see the logic in people saying no proportional response. completely disproportional response, so that everyone in this area would see that if you touch us, let alone conduct a massacre, we will go wild and stampede. Richard Nixon, not a very popular president in retrospect, called that the crazy president theory. He said the enemy should think that the president can go completely bananas, and we should be very, very careful of him. And this is what Donald Trump did exactly right when he took down Soleimani. They said, I'm unpredictable, and I can suddenly go completely wild, and you better be on alert. So I spoke to one of the advisors to Mike Pompeo, who was Trump's Secretary of State, and I asked him, this was when the United States first assembled the coalition against the Houthis, which is a defensive coalition with interception of missile systems. So it's supposed to defend the shippings. And I said, what would have Pompeo done? And he said, we would have attacked the Houthis. And when Biden attacked the Houthis, they first telegrammed their punch and said, why don't you guys clear the Iranians before we strike? And then I asked him, what would Pompeo suggest after the massacre? And he said, we would have drowned the entire Iranian fleet the day after the massacre, because it's their arm, we know where it comes from, and this is how you achieve deterrence. You don't achieve deterrence by saying, we want to de-escalate. Let's find a way to de-escalate, because now they've started killing American servicemen, because they know that this administration is just going to retreat. And if you listen to what the Iranians said, and the pressure is arriving via Tony Blinken on us, the Iranians are saying, we will keep attacking you until you restrain Israel. If you don't, we will continue attacking you. And what does this administration do? Try to restrain Israel. So they're playing the wrong game in the wrong region and have no clue what they're doing. And our conclusion should be, first and foremost, that we should start, we have the technology, we should start manufacturing our own weapons here, and we cannot rely on a democratic administration to protect us, because they're playing a different game. Their plan for the region is sacrificing our interests in order to appease Iran, and we should start saying that out loud.
You're saying that because currently Israel doesn't manufacture its own weapons. Granted, the U.S. did. It only gets weapons from the U.S. and credits.
Yeah, all this idea of American foreign aid is is basically a subsidy for the American weapons industry, and so we get this aid, but we have to buy American equipment, and in the end, we developed such a dependence on American aid that we had ammunition for the first 2 days of the war and not much more. And ever since, we've been scrambling to resupply ourselves, partly with American aid, which thankfully a lot of which has arrived, but they also use it as a lever on us, and we will have to diversify our sources of weapons and increase our own power of manufacturing. It's unfeasible that the state that has developed the Iron Dome cannot manufacture bullets. It's ridiculous. My friend Dan Shiftan says that Israel has always been Athens internally and Sparta externally. And so it should be Goliath to the Middle East. And I'm not sure it should play David to the West. I think we should show our democratic and liberal face and moderate face to the rest of the West, but we shouldn't be the victims, and we shouldn't be. So maybe David is a good example because David fought back, but we should certainly not project weakness in any direction, not even towards the West, because the West is in deep crisis, and the West doesn't understand that this war is also the front line in the fight between civilizations, in which the West is suffering from an autoimmune disease called wokeness and is unable to protect its own interest and its own values. And this is what it comes to. if you do not protect your own values, you get the Muslim Brotherhood values. And what happened in the massacre, and people don't realize it at all in the West, is that much of this is Muslim Brotherhood religious ritual. Some of these slaughters hark back in their style and in the damage to what they perceive as the original Muhammadan religion. And you know, if you heard the voices, I don't know if you heard this recording of a guy ecstatically calling his parents and, "Mom, I just killed 10 Jews with my own hands." So this is when Israelis say this is worse than the Nazis. What they mean is the Nazis tried to hide their final solution. These people post their sadistic gore on social media and get applause from their own public. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with real barbarians, and the West is not realizing this, and it's still busy playing with its own guilty conscience instead of realizing that it too is under serious threat. So first of all, I suggest we stop talking about solutions. We'll have to somehow manage this situation, and for the time being, until, I don't know, there's a generational change, Hamas should not have any power whatever in Gaza. It should cease to exist as an organization and a military power. Israel should retain security control over the whole territory, and it also should extract a serious price in terms of land. It should take away part of the Gaza Strip, because if you look at this enemy where death is a glorious thing, then death is not a deterrent. A deterrent is if you start a war with Israel, you lose territory, because their war is for gaining territories. They should pay in the coin they wanted to win with. Pleasure, and my love to the people of Quillette, and Claire in particular.
Thank you so much.